note, in this episode, we will be discussing animal slaughter and issues around animal welfare. Okay. Can we just... I mean, can we say why we've got a blankie on? Because Rebecca's legs are so brown compared to mine. It's so embarrassing. I forced us both. No, it's not. It's cold. It's cold today. It's chill. It's chill. Considering what I've just been at the Highland show, and oh my gosh, I don't want to say it was too hot, but the couple of days I was there, I mean, I had Factor 50 on, which was rare for me. That's how.
Did you put sun cream on?
Yeah, I know.
Does sun cream stop you tanning?
I'm
not a tanning person. I'm a ginger person. So.
I do love a tan. I do love a tan, but
I feel like one of these days I might actually do my hair or something for a podcast. Just zhuzh me up.
Look, if you've washed it, that's all we can hope for.
It's clean. That's all you're getting. It's clean. Unlike any other aspect of my life.
Right. Well, hello everybody. Sorry, we always do those little interludes of just chatting rubbish at the start.
I know, but should we do that or not? Is that going to turn people off?
They want to hear about your hair, if it's clean or not clean, I think.
I mean, it's a miracle when it is. No, I'm joking, it is. I'm a very clean person.
Well, I feel like we haven't actually been in the trailer for a long time. We've had a couple of very manic weeks, haven't we? So, but we're coming back with quite a controversial topic. One that I don't know. Look, we said we wanted to talk about honest conversations, unfiltered, and tackle the conversations which not everybody is tackling.
I mean, it's a bit of a scary one to cover truthfully, I think, because you don't want to come across in any way as a racist bigot, but you also feel the need to say what you think, or what you think you think.
Yes, well, that's
what we've discovered. What we think, but we don't think because we don't know.
So we're going to be talking about non-stun slaughter, religious slaughter, halal, kosher.
Is it kosher or kosher?
Kosher.
I don't know.
Kosher. But we wanted to talk about it. It's definitely a big thing in the farming community, but extends beyond because actually the religious market for, well, particularly sheep actually in this country is, to be honest, keeping the sheep job alive.
Yeah.
Usually we'd obviously do our 2 segments, so we'd cover a couple of topics.
Mm-hmm.
We know that we're not going to be able to do this justice in one episode, but we'll only be talking about that.
I think there's too much information and too many opinions to do it justice in one episode.
Absolutely. But the reason particularly we've picked upon it now is because recently there has just been a debate on non-stun slaughter. There was an e-petition signed by over 109,000 people. It described non-stun slaughter as barbaric and basically not in keeping with modern day values when it comes to animal welfare, etc. So by the looks of it, there was some clashing, obviously, in the debate, but perhaps, I don't know, is it good to bring that balance? Is it good to bring it into conversation?
Well, I think somebody had described the footpaths episode that we did and said it was a balanced conversation, and I would like this to be a balanced conversation.
Absolutely. We've done a fair bit of research on this one, and even with the research,
I still don't get it.
It's still been pretty hard to actually get to the truth of everything. Well, that Rupert Lowe video, mention that, Charlotte, because that was an interesting one.
That was where I first kind of sent it into the group. We have a little group chat just between us two, and I'd sent it in and said, should we be covering this? And it was do we dare? Honestly, that was the conversation. Do we dare cover this topic? And it was basically him in, I think he was in Parliament, wasn't he? Discussing everything that's wrong with religious slaughter. And he is very, very open with his thoughts on the matter. And that's what kind of got us thinking about it. Now, I did agree with some of his points.
I think probably at this stage it's worth clarifying that at the moment in this country, all livestock should be stunned. However, there are religious, let's say, exemptions, derogations, which mean
basically paragraph 1, they cannot do. So when you're looking at the rules, they're exempt from paragraph 1 with it being religious slaughter.
Yes.
I understand why certain people, why a lot of people would say, yeah, but why?
Yes.
Why does it matter?
Yeah. This is the tricky question of balancing that religious freedom with, to our mind, animal welfare concerns. I find it very hard, and the narrative that we've received from our followers is pretty one-sided.
Very much.
Saying that, and halal, I think, is much more talked about than kosher.
Yeah, but actually, that's the bit I don't understand. In terms of numbers, I understand that it's a greater proportion of the animals that are killed with a halal slaughter. But actually, the overall percentage of non-stun slaughter is very low.
Well, here, according to the Food Standards Agency, only about 2.6% of animals processed in 2024 were slaughtered without stunning, which includes both halal and kosher meat. Non-stun halal is very much the minority, not the standard. It was a website called Halal Food Guy who picked up on those facts. But 2.6% of animals processed equates to about 27 million animals. So that is a massive number.
It's a considerable amount of animals, but actually, in the grand scheme of things, it's not a huge concern.
No, slaughtered without stunning. So I think perhaps it will be interesting to go slightly into some of the reasons, I guess, that people think that stunning should be required by law for every single animal, regardless of religious exemption. And it's mainly the cruelty argument, isn't it?
Yes, but then so yesterday I looked into some webinars from a guy who works for AHDB. Is it Owl?
Owl, yeah.
I can never say his name properly. Owl. I actually met him once at Mount St. John's, and he was a really interesting guy. He gave a talk, and I when I was tagging some calves, listened to some of his webinars, and they were very interesting to the point that you kind of questioned whether or not it was crueler to be stunning than killing, and looking at other slaughter methods, for instance, chickens and pigs. It's far less cruel to kill something that dies within 8 seconds than it is for something that's put in a gas chamber, for instance. Like, the whole topic is barbaric, and yet this sits exactly opposite to everything that we as farmers want to think happens.
I think, you know how we've talked before about that drive to market, taking stuff to market, and
I close my eyes after that.
It's
I pretend it doesn't happen.
Well, and I think this is it. We have reassured ourselves that as farmers we've done exactly what we can do to the max of animal welfare standards, all the health and welfare, etc. So our step of the process in our mind is done to as perfect as we can make it.
It's as kind as possible, isn't it?
Yes. But the problem is,
we don't get any choice.
Death is inevitable. These animals are only produced because they are going into the food chain. Now, as farmers, we don't as such have any control over which part of the food chain they go into as such. So you take them to market. So fair enough if you take them direct to an abattoir and they are going for a specific end market. But if you're selling at an auction market, you don't control who buys them, and therefore you don't control whether they're going into the halal market, the kosher market. It's one of those things. Now, I've obviously been reading quite a bit, and there's quite a few farmers who are uneasy about the fact that they don't know almost.
Yeah, but then they don't not take them. They don't not take the money.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hold on, money, that's an interesting... I feel like we're going to be quite chaotic on this one because I think our thoughts are chaotic. The research that we've done, the conversations that we've had
they're very
before...
I'm unsure. I'm unsure on the whole thing. I don't know where I stand. I honestly, in my mind, there's something in my mind that tells me I do not agree with it. I do not agree with this. It's barbaric. It's awful. But is that just what I've been told? Because the research... as in Temple Grandin doing research, which is someone who sits on panel discussions for the AHDB. They've made films about how wonderful she is and about how the standards of her animal welfare and the movements, yes, and the handling facilities they are researched beyond anything that's ever been done before. She's literally single-handedly changed, the curved race for the cows. And yet this is a person who is perfectly fine with a blade to the throat.
Yes.
That's fine.
Well, also, if we go back in time, now I'm not saying everything back in time was animal welfare friendly, but actually stunning is effectively
relatively
a modern invention, isn't it? I think there's a really, really interesting report. Now, don't get me wrong, I haven't read every single part of it, but Owl from AHDB was involved in the report. And actually,
should we clarify who he is?
Yes, he's effectively a halal expert.
Well, he doesn't like to be called an expert either. I discovered that yesterday, but he is a font of knowledge on the subject. Now, he is not a scholar, so he's not a religious scholar. He is a scientist, so he basically presents with the facts on this subject. Yes. He isn't saying, this is what I feel. He's saying this is what it is, and he is a knowledge, isn't he? But he doesn't like to be called an expert, even though he clearly is very much an expert on it. But I also watched one of his webinars last night, and in it he showed videos of the different slaughter processes. Now, I'm no stranger to killing animals. I very much force myself to look when the knackerman comes. It's part of my duty. I've taken care of this animal. I've obviously let it down at some point. That's why it's dead or needs to be shot. So I force myself to watch it. Roy doesn't. Roy walks away. Roy will not. He won't have it. He can't deal with it. So will his dad doesn't either.
Really?
If the knackerman comes to shoot something, they both walk away. I think Roy's much better these days. But yeah, yes. In the past, I know that he wouldn't do it.
I think the thing about the knackerman, though, is that animal... The only reason we call the knackerman, we probably even need to explain that. We'll have non-farming listeners perhaps who, the knackerman is basically somebody who collects fallen stock, so dead stock which could have passed away, naturally in the field or the shed, but they also are licensed to dispatch an animal with a bolt gun, effectively. So it's
a shot
to
the
me,
head.
The most instant death an animal can have.
It's funny, because we used to have horses when we were younger. And we obviously, Roy's dad still has horses. We don't have any now. And at the stables, I lived in Preston, and that was my first kind of countryside, exploration, was a huge, big livery yard. And it was a conversation I remember people having around me when we were younger. These girls didn't want their horses shot because they thought it was cruel. They'd rather them be injected, when in actual fact, that's a much slower, awful death, I suppose, than being shot to the head and it being instantaneous. The horse falling, yes, it's dramatic, but it is, it's a funny thing what you think is better for an animal and what actually is better, what's kinder.
Well, we want to do an episode on anthropomorphism, don't we? So we'll touch on all of this, but
Charlotte didn't know what that meant before she met Rebecca.
But I think the whole conversation is difficult. But yeah, a knackerman is well, I guess that probably sounds a bit like a derogatory term, but they are
it's just what they're called.
Extremely
valuable. And then they take them to a huge processing plant, say for instance Alba Proteins, if you're Dennis Owridge, and they get made into aviation fuel, makeup, crayons. Honestly, it's an episode in itself, what happens to animals after they've died. It is incredibly interesting, and also a very lucrative industry, a big industry.
Of course, I think it's important to note, again, particularly for perhaps non-farming listeners, animals which have died of an illness or even natural causes, perhaps they've had medication, they're not going into the human food chain. So therefore, other purposes mean that a lot of those animals are still utilised. Some of them will be incinerated.
And is that the same across all countries?
That's a really good question. I mean, we're very stringent, obviously, over here in terms of if we give an animal an injection, medicine, painkiller, antibiotics, whatever it is, we have a specific, what's called a withdrawal period. So in that time, that animal, well, it's either its meat and its milk and its offal, have a specific amount of time for that medication to leave its system, and only then can it enter the food chain. I suspect other countries aren't all as stringent on that withdrawal period.
Yeah,
and that
would be interesting to have a look at, wouldn't it?
It would be interesting. But let's go back to the value of the halal sector.
Wow, huge.
which is really, it's really, really interesting. And we've had a couple of comments on Instagram on that as well. And
I'll play, when you've said this, I'll play a voice note from a friend of mine because it was incredibly interesting what he said at the end of it.
Yep. I don't know how anyone can be negative on this. It forces the lamb/sheep trade up. A few people on that wavelength, not as many as people. There's more people who think it's barbaric, and they've used the word barbaric. But
yeah, but do they know the ins and outs? Have they watched the videos like I have? Probably not.
So this report came from some doctors at the University of Huddersfield and Awal as well. He's getting a lot of mentions.
He is, isn't he?
But the report found that the value of the halal meat and poultry sector at slaughter is approximately £1.7 billion out of an overall UK total of £11 billion, equating to about 15% of the overall value. It stated that if the halal market remains constant at 15%, over the next 5 years, this figure will rise to almost £2 billion by 2028, with the UK meat sector reaching £13.5 billion. So that is not a number to be...
contribution to...
Yeah. And anecdotally, when you go to auction markets, whatever, there's a big focus on timing of taking, for us, it's lambs, timing of taking sheep to market to fall in line with religious festivals.
Yeah, completely.
And actually, I've had very interesting conversations with people who are involved in, that buying, retail, etc. process of halal. I think they're interesting. I think the sector is interesting, and I do think that without the religious communities, our livestock trade
wouldn't be there.
Yeah, genuinely.
So I'll play you this voice note from a friend of ours. I don't know if he wants his name mentioned, so I'm obviously not going to. But yeah, see what you think of.
Yeah, halal slaughter. Morning, Miss Ashley. Halal slaughter. It's brutal. It's a brutal way of dispatching an animal. I'm not in agreement with it. However, there is a fine line here because the ethnic market, it's a big market, and you've got to be delicate what you say now, but it's a large market and it's a growing market, especially with immigration going on. I am not a fan of religious slaughter and the method that goes with it. However, like I said, the value that comes from the background, the people that believe in religious slaughter, it's a trade-off. It's a trade-off. But I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan of it.
And that, 2 points to that voice note of the person who shall remain nameless. That is very often what people don't know what to say. They go, oh gosh, I really want. Oh, I don't really know how to word it. I don't really know. I don't want to upset anyone. I don't want to come across as racist.
Yes.
I don't want to. I don't know. I don't. And that is very much, you hear that, and that man is self-assured. He knows his mind. I know him well. Very good friend, and he knows his farming, and yet it's reduced him to ums and ahs.
And I think this is exactly it. I think because, unfortunately, we are living in a society which is less tolerant of other religious or ethnic groups. Unfortunately, I think that's the situation we're in. This conversation around religious slaughter is worryingly becoming a them versus us situation.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be.
And it shouldn't be. It's not about... For me, personally, it's not about intolerance to religion or different ethnic communities.
No.
It's about animal welfare. And I think perhaps the animal welfare argument could get lost because people are worried about how else to, I guess, tackle a conversation.
We've both listened to a really good podcast recently. I think you're still listening to it, aren't you? And it was the Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling. I'll actually put a link in because I enjoyed it so much. And
I don't listen to podcasts, and I've stuck with it.
Is it a 5-part, 6-part series, something like that? And it's so good. And it's basically about J.K. Rowling coming out in favour of women and women's only spaces, and saying that the recent trans kind of movement is detrimental to the women's rights movement. Bear in mind, she grew up in the 60s when, wife beating and things was, and I hate to say it, I can't even imagine it, was an acceptable thing, which is unfathomable to me now. I cannot imagine that being an acceptable thing. But do you know what? 50s, 60s, it was, perfectly acceptable to smack your wife around if she was naughty, basically. Didn't have your tea ready on time. Times have changed. But the point of the trans activists was that you are leaning into the wider anti-trans narrative. And it's not necessarily specifically about you sticking up for women's rights. It's you giving them, as in the bigots, more of a platform. And I think this is on the same lines as that. We're specifically talking about animal welfare standards whilst killing an animal, but actually it's contributing somehow to a wider conversation about, Islamophobia, I can't even say it. I'm that not racist. I don't even know what it means. Do you know what I mean? And I think with us being very innocently talking about this subject, it could be seen or used, or there are people who are also discussing this subject that are discussing it for very different reasons to us.
Yes, who are trying to use it as a way to inflame a religious situation and an immigration situation, as you say, because actually this was a demand for halal meat report in 2020 by AHDB. More than 60% of halal consumers eat lamb weekly, compared with just 6% of the general UK population. We cannot deny the strength of that market.
We only eat lamb, and we eat lamb regularly because we butch 2 or 3 a year. Well, maybe more, to be honest. Or that one that ran into a bloody fence and broke its neck. You butch lambs when you've got them. And speaking to other people that I know, they do not buy lamb.
No, 100%. I think now would be probably quite an interesting time to bring in some of the arguments from the British Veterinary Association. Obviously, you would hope that their only motivation is to talk about animal welfare and kind of in, let's say, as objective scientific terms as possible.
Yes.
So their long-term aim is completely stunned. They want to end non-stun slaughter. However, I think what they also do quite well is suggest some steps which you can kind of take steps in the meantime. A couple of really interesting ones for me. Labelling. Now, we've talked about labelling before in terms of food in general, perhaps British. Is it clear that it's a British produced food or whatever? They would like clear labelling of meat and meat products from animals that have not been stunned before slaughter. Now, I think this is interesting because, I'd be interested to know how much food on the shelves has been killed without stunning. And I have no idea how you go around to get those facts and get them actually put on a label.
So, interestingly, a voice note I will play you hold on, let me play it because I need to formulate my thoughts because I know what I want to say.
We had a brilliant little slaughterhouse about a mile away from us. Same family for 100 years, but over recent years, it just got screwed into the ground that much, like abattoirs up and down the country have been. Government bureaucracy and all that crap, to the point that they were forced to shut it down. And after about, 18 months, 2 years of it being closed, it was bought by a local Muslim family who spent a fortune on the place. And they did a really good job modernising it, bringing it up to speed, and it was superb. But the locals found out on the Facebook forums, it went wild, that this was a halal slaughterhouse. And it was nothing other than ignorance and racism. And I defended them a lot, trying to explain to people what halal really is, how important it is to British farming and the economy. But then as soon as they opened up, we discovered it was non-stun as well as stunned halal. And then pretty quickly there was footage came out, secret footage from Joey Carlstrong, which made all the national papers, national media, and it was disgusting what it showed. Nobody could defend that. And how the hell anybody could defend halal having seen that? And it is a shame because they have tarred everybody with the same brush, whether it's stunned or non-stunned. Because the reality is, stunned halal is no different to our, normal slaughter, whatever you want to call it. It's just somebody saying a prayer and blessing it. It's still stunned and bled in exactly the same way. It is just a name. So, but, because of these extreme cases of a few people, they have given the whole halal a really bad name.
So my thing was, say, for instance, that is such a small proportion of animals are killed without stunning. Do they have a direct market for these products to go to people who want them? Because say for instance, there's a certain proportion of the Muslim population that will not accept that stunned halal is halal. Stunned killing is halal. You know what I mean? So the non-stunned meat, does it have a home already? Is it very unlikely that the non-stunned meat is going to end up on the shelves of Tesco or Morrison's to be picked up by the general public? Because there's clearly a cry and a want for that meat. So is it utilised? Is it all taken by those ethnic minority groups that want it?
Well, and interesting on that, from the British Veterinary Association, the BVA, they would like to see a non-stun permit system to ensure that the number of animals slaughtered without prior stunning does not exceed the relevant demand of the UK's religious communities.
Completely agree with that. I think that's a brilliant idea.
That's a really balanced statement. Mm-hmm. And something like the BVA are not religiously motivated in their arguments. It is not racist. It is not meant to be prejudiced or discriminatory. They are simply trying to balance religious freedoms and choices and maximise animal welfare. Probably worth actually clarifying the idea of why some Muslims do allow stun, because, well, if I talk about the demonstration of life protocol. Now, again, AHDB have done a lot of work on this.
Yeah, I watched some videos of it yesterday. It was very... it was one of those things that I was watching the webinar and I knew I needed to understand the process to be able to talk about it, because if, like many people on the internet who are shouting off on forums, etc., on Facebook posts, I guarantee none of them have watched the same videos that I watched, and I think it was important to actually understand the processes.
Yes, so I'm going to read this. The demonstration of life protocol is an industry-led assurance tool that was introduced in the UK for abattoirs to be able to demonstrate to the Muslim authorities that head-only electrical stunning of small ruminants is non-lethal and hence compatible with halal slaughter. Now, I think that effectively comes from... It's the idea that that animal could come back to life. So therefore, the animal carcass that you then slit its throat, albeit it's been stunned, it's not kind of damaged in any way. It could still...
there's another method of stunning that stops the heart and affects the heart. So technically, the animal is dead. Also, there's another like the bolt, like it seems to be like I want to describe it as a bolt gun, but with an electrical bolt that goes directly through into the brain. That essentially scrambles the brain and makes them brain dead. So that's irreparable damage. Whereas when he explained it sort of like. The cells in the brain talk to each other, neurons in the brain talk to each other, and you're kind of messing up the signals.
It's a state of unconsciousness.
Yeah, so basically you're making it pass out, but you're not killing it. So they're unconscious.
Yes, and therefore the argument is can't feel pain, aren't suffering.
But technically could still hear,
yes,
from what I gather, the blessing that's been put on them.
I think... You can see, as I said, this is a kind of chaotic round the houses episode because...
Yeah, because you've got to be so delicate.
You do have... Delicate's the right word. Delicate and balanced.
I don't want to offend anybody and get... And also, I'm not being funny, we're spouting off on a podcast, which is all well and good. What about if we put the wrong information out there?
Yes.
And someone takes it as gospel, that's the truth.
And I think that is a problem in that because people are worried about talking about it, it's potentially hard to get all the data together. And so misinformation on the topic is rife. But again, BVA want robust and regular reporting on the numbers of animals that aren't stunned, the numbers that don't receive an effective stun, and the amount of non-stun meat that is exported, for example. One thing they do say, and I completely agree with this, positive dialogue with religious certification bodies to promote stunning. We can have a positive dialogue around this, and I think the non-stun halal in particular is down to...
Can we just as well... We're not talking about kosher.
No, we haven't even got onto that really, but
and
that's
they are well against stunning.
Yes.
Like they are all about the non-stun.
Yes.
Like they at least with halal, and I'm not saying, and please do not get me wrong, I'm not saying anything. Literally stick to the absolute core of the subject. There is no stunning. They're not having it. Not having it at all. Whereas at least with the halal, there's a dialogue, there's open communication, there's some people accept it, some people don't, which is fine. You know, different scholars seem to think different things from what I can gather. But with kosher, it's a non-negotiable.
This is it. And again, that then looks as though we're victimizing the Jewish community.
Definitely not doing that.
And it's not. It's
I mean, let's be honest, they have all the money in the world. I ain't messing with them.
But let's look at a few comments that we've had.
Oh, yeah.
For example, somebody said, I thought I was well informed, but wasn't aware halal stun was a weaker stun. I cannot see why we are allowing any non-stun or weak stun in UK abattoirs.
I don't think it's weaker. I think it's just different. It does something different. It's aiming at a different place in the animal. And you know, the most effective and pain-free, I won't say pain-free, but the most effective way of slaughtering an animal is to stick it. What was it?
Yes.
I can't even think. Basically, they make a big slit in the animal's chest and stab it and slit all of the arteries and veins and heart and whatnot, and then all the blood pours out and the animal's dead within 8 seconds. That's the fastest and most effective way to kill an animal.
This is. I completely appreciate if you're.
Don't get me wrong. It was awful to watch, but I made myself do it.
Yes, and I think this is exactly it. We can't claim to have an opinion on the topic until you've really started to try and do some research. And as I keep mentioning, we have not got to the bottom of it in the slightest, but it's something we really wanted to talk about to show that there's two sides. Well, there's probably about 52 sides to this argument, because it's not a case of halal is bad and, let's say, normal slaughter is good.
Do you not think it's a bit like lamb as well, that there should be two... You know, like we call lamb, and it isn't actually a lamb. Well, it is a lamb. Well, that's the problem. To the general public, they think we're eating a newborn lamb, when in actual fact we're not. They're, 50 kilos or whatever it is at that time. Halal and non-stun slaughter are two very separate things.
Yes.
Halal is like the saying a blessing over an animal. I think from what I can get, I mean, this is the problem. I could be completely wrong.
Yes.
This is my interpretation of someone's religious belief, which is just...
Yes.
I mean, let's be
We're
honest.
not living the religion.
I did really bad in RE.
This is an interesting one. I don't know much about it. Sums it up.
Yeah.
So, well acknowledged, because neither do we.
But so we choose a podcast episode on it.
It's just so current. We had.
It is very, very current, and it was that Rupert Lowe video that went viral. And I think it's very interesting with the internet. Once you've started watching something like that and watched it all the way through, it then shows you more of these things, and that's what's so dangerous about the internet. So since watching that video, I have started seeing more religiously motivated posts, and you can see how kids go down the wrong path and they end up in a bit of a goldfish, a rabbit hole or whatever you want to call it.
Yes, if they watch one video related to, say, drugs or something like that,
they then get fed them.
Every single video is going to be on drugs. So if it says, I don't know much about it, but if it's as described in the debate, so that's the Rupert Lowe video, it sounds brutal even when some form of weak stunning is used. I wouldn't eat halal or kosher meat, and I wouldn't allow my livestock to be slaughtered in such a way. We don't allow hunting of foxes, etc. for animal welfare reasons. So why would we disregard animal welfare in this context? Now
that comment on the face, I agree with it completely.
Yes. I can't
if
say
it is a
anything
weaker stun, and if I honestly, I do. I agree with it completely, but then I have to say that I don't agree with it because otherwise you are then seen as a bigoted racist.
Yes.
And that's the problem.
Yes.
That's the problem because I am not. But yeah, it's just so hard. Do you know what? I just cut the episode there. We can't talk about it anymore. I just don't know what I think anymore.
I actually want to bring up an interesting Facebook post which I saw from somebody very involved in the halal sector. Won't mention any names, but I thought the post was very interesting. I won't read it all out, but very interesting comments on the wider economic impact of banning halal. So the consequences for domestic agriculture. At one point that they mentioned, livestock prices are likely to fall as Muslim and Jewish communities may resort to importing meat from abroad to meet their religious requirements. Now, I think that's very interesting because we talk massively about the threats of importing in general. But if
Are you willing to trade off your animal welfare standards?
But if it's happening somewhere else in the world, would we rather not have meat
More control
from
over it here?
Does that open us up to, and this is no disrespect to other countries, but an underworld? You know when you have, when you legalise drugs, the danger, people use them in a less dangerous way.
They're going to do it anyway.
This is it.
They're going to do it anyway. Regardless of what happens, you are just pushing it further underground.
Yes. And this is exactly it. Is it better, as the BVA suggest, to have a more positive open dialogue, to be better on our data, to be better on our labelling, and be tolerant of that religious community who, yes, are different to the religion. Well, I'm not a particularly religious person, but they might have different beliefs. But isn't that the patchwork of the world that we live in?
Yeah, it's a bit like, who am I to question what they believe? And who, like, exactly, who are you to question what other people believe? Personally, I can't actually see it making any difference to the quality of the food that you're eating, the difference to the nourishment that you're getting. You know, it's not going to change the makeup of the actual food. But there is the issue.
Yes.
Do you believe that it should be allowed because someone believes it?
Absolutely. I just think we don't have enough there on the animal welfare side to make sweeping.
But also that statement that you said with it, yes, they will just source it from elsewhere. It's a bit like it's a threat, if anything. Well, let us do it. Oh, we'll just get it from somewhere else.
But that actually,
but everything in that statement was true. If you don't allow it properly here and keep it all above board, it will be sourced elsewhere. So it's a true statement, but it does somewhat come across as not a veiled threat as such, but it will have it.
But perhaps we're seeing that across the whole agricultural sector as it stands at the moment. And I know I briefly mentioned this in another episode, but when we talk about the cereals market, if we as arable farmers selling a ton of wheat, we might have produced it to the highest standards we can. But if we wanted a higher price for it, well, we'll just go and import it from somewhere else. That's exactly what the grain buyers are doing at the moment, importing it from other countries. So that the threat is happening across the whole sector.
And do you know what I do find, and this is completely different, what I do find very interesting is even us, we get comments, and Joey Carb Strong or whatever he's called,
yes.
He once made a video of me with a Hannibal Lecter mask over my face.
Oh my gosh. What were you doing?
Skinning a calf. Yeah.
Really?
So actually, yeah, it was pretty fitting. It was a beautiful skin that I did. It was, it was really, I'm like a tailor with a calf skin. But yeah, he did not like it.
Really?
I'll try and find it. It was a couple of years ago. But all these anti-meat eating, vegan activist people, where are they in this conversation? They're quite happy to lay it on at a farmer. Yes. What at the point of killing? If this is so barbaric, where are they? Why are they not picketed outside abattoirs? Why are they not stood petitioning against this?
Yeah. That's a very, very good point.
Because they're all terrified of being tarred with the racist brush. That's why.
Yes.
That's the only reason they can't be.
I think it's actually a sad state of affairs that this conversation has been forced down the attack on religion
I know.
route. I think it's really sad that it has.
that's why we picked up on it, because
Yes.
it has been clearly, I think, masked as a it very much. If you watch the video, I think, and the person who's created the video, I think it's masked in animal welfare. I don't necessarily think it is.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the main aim of the problem that they're trying to highlight. It's a tough topic, isn't it? I mean, would you trade your animal welfare?
I think the other thing is that how do consumers view farmers? Some people are very positive, and some people think that we are the cruelest people on the planet. Is there a risk? And perhaps it's selfish to say that farmers might be at risk, but consumers could be saying that as farmers we're allowing this cruel practice to go on by...
Well, we're accepting the money.
Yes.
We're not
Are
stating
we
where they
facilitating
go.
it?
I mean, if I go direct to the collection centre, so for instance, there's a couple of routes of selling your animals. You can go to the auction, like you do with all of yours, don't you?
Yeah.
And you will, obviously, they will be bid on by buyers.
Exactly like an auction you see for furniture or antiques online.
Exactly like that. Whereas
if you have a buoyant market and there's lots of buyers, you'll push the price up. Some weeks or some years, there's not as many buyers there. People are a bit more uncertain and your price is lower. You are just accepting what you get on the day, and you don't know who'll buy it.
Great at the auction because her animals are beautiful and fat. So some of ours, anything lesser that isn't perfect, it's not of weight, it's too heavy, too light, it just isn't the prime lamb. We'll send it to the collection centre. But so basically we take it to a place around the corner in the mornings and we drop them off. They're all held there. They then go on a wagon and they go direct to Bamber Bridge, which is a slaughterhouse. At no point do I even consider what's going on there. I just take them.
Yes.
I don't say, oh no, I couldn't possibly leave them here if you're going to go and take them to a non-stun slaughter. I just don't think about it.
No. But do you know what?
If I was that bothered, which I would be stopping, I would be, no, I can't do that. I don't know what, that's the point. What would you do?
Yes. It's interesting, and I know this is probably not a very good comparison to draw, but if you have, say, for example, our phones or the iPod or the laptop, they have different parts within them that will be manufactured by different people. So
Children mining cobalt in Indonesia.
Well, exactly. Somebody will be doing that part. Somebody's doing the microchip. The screen comes from somewhere else. At not one point does the person manufacturing the microchip think, oh, I wonder how this laptop's going to be used. So not one point in those processes leading up to the final process are you worried about the end outcome as such. Does that make sense?
It could be used for an international crime ring.
Well, this is exactly
So
it.
I'm not going to not make the iPhone because it might be used for something bad.
But animal welfare
2.something% of phones, I'm sure, are used for crime.
But animal welfare is do you know what? It's a very emotive issue I think in Britain. We are pitched as a nation of animal lovers. Do you think that changes the tone on the argument?
Yes, we're also soft to the point that people keep their dogs alive longer than they should when they're poorly.
Yes.
If there's a dog that's got cancer and it's in pain, they don't say, all right, put it down now, that's the right thing to do. No, they take it home and put it on a cushion and stroke it because we're soft. Then they do.
Yes.
People do keep things. I mean, I'm not being funny. There's a cow in the field that should have been shot a week ago, but Roy still holds out hope that cow is happy. She looks happy and I'm standing her up and everything's fine and she might come round. No, she won't. It's going to end up being shot. But he can't bring himself to make that step and make that decision because it's like you're playing God.
Yes. It's a very bizarre situation to be in. And if you overthink it, I'm kind of thinking, I wonder who's even going to listen to this episode because it's
so bizarre and it's so
our
chaotic.
ramblings
I'm sorry.
of around death of an animal, intentional death of an animal, which is very, very difficult. And consumers are, I think by choice, choose to be detached from that, on the whole. And actually, I don't blame them.
Ignorance is bliss.
Yeah, in this scenario.
But also, ignorance is also a little bit irresponsible on when you are commenting and vocalising your opinion. Now, fair enough, if you're ignorant and you say nothing, that's fine. But if you're ignorant and you don't know the facts and you come out online and you know...
inflame an argument.
I completely agree, then that is irresponsible.
Yes, I 100%. And you see it time and time again, and that misinformation spreads probably more readily than the facts because it is deliberately inflammatory. And it is, I think it's done to create tensions. I genuinely do. I think people do it to stir up an argument purposefully. They know that they're probably off the mark with what's going on, but they do it.
I think in context, when you are, in context, you look at all of the slaughter methods for animals in this country. They're all, it literally is taking the life of something else. It's not going to be pleasant. But it's the lesser of the two, with the 7 evils. You know, when you look at how chickens are killed, and like we read something that they're put in a chamber and they're filled with
Gas.
Was it CO2?
Yes.
I can't remember what it was. They can take 8 minutes for a pig to die. I'm sorry, 8 minutes of something, being gassed to death, or 8 seconds of something being
bled to death.
I mean, and losing consciousness straight away. Which one's crueler?
Yes. I am going to be very honest as well and say, I think there's a lot more animal cruelty in, let's be honest, there are some bad farmers out there.
Yeah, there are.
I would hope few and far between, but there are some farmers who cause worse suffering to an animal over a longer period than non-stun slaughter. And very much so, there are worse cases of kind of pet abandonment, etc., pets not being cared for, animal hoarding, etc., all the rest of it, which I actually think are a bigger cause for animal welfare concerns than this debate. And I don't know if that's controversial. I don't know if people will agree with me, but I think there's other things that you see which are sustained neglect,
Yes.
which is worse than this.
All of it's cruel. All of the slaughter is cruel. Let's not pretend. There is no nice slaughter. And that's the point. I think people are trying to be self-righteous and saying, oh, well, this isn't as bad. Of course it's as bad. You're killing it. Like, don't be so stupid. Don't be naive. Just because... and yeah, the interesting bit for me was reading all the papers that Temple Grandin wrote on it. They were very, very interesting because she literally said, it is not as cruel. And yet... because in our minds it looks crueler and it feels crueler, we're thinking it is. So I don't know.
Yes.
So interestingly, we had a couple the other day come from New Zealand, and they were doing a bit of a tour, farmers on tour, and they've been down Lancashire. They come up to Cumbria. They're going around the Lake District. I think they were going into Scotland. Anyway, we were having the conversation about what she basically said, what can you do? So